The wind in the Arizona territory didn't just blow. It howled like a choir of banshees through the crimson ribs of Devil's Mesa, carrying the scent of baked clay and the stinging grit of the painted desert. To most, it was a warning to seek shelter before the sun vanished and the mountain lions began their hunt. But to Abigail, or Abby Sterling, it was the sound of her own restless spirit. She stood on the splintered porch of the Last Chance Infirmary, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows and her hands stained with the green chlorophyll of crushed creosote leaves. Abby was a woman forged from ironwood and desert stars, a physician's daughter who had stayed behind to mend the broken bones and battered souls of a silver mining camp that the rest of the world had forgotten. She was the heartbeat of the Mesa, a woman who could stitch a knife wound by the flickering light of a tallow candle while staring down the meanest drunk in the territory. Yet as she watched the silhouettes of the saguaro cacti stretch like jagged fingers across the sunset, she felt a hollow ache, a premonition of a storm that had nothing to do with the gathering clouds. The oppressive silence of the evening was shattered by the rhythmic, frantic thud of a horse pushed to the very edge of its life. Abby's posture shifted, her spine snapping straight as she reached for the lever-action Marlin rifle leaned against the doorframe, a habit born of necessity in a land where the law was often just a memory. Out of the swirling red dust emerged a shadow, a tall, broad-shouldered man slumped dangerously low in a saddle of darkened, sweat-stained leather. His horse, a massive blue roan flecked with white foam and streaks of drying crimson, stumbled as it reached the hitching post. The man didn't dismount. He collapsed, his spurs jingling with a final lonely metallic clatter against the hard-packed earth. Abby didn't hesitate. She dropped the rifle and ran, her heavy skirts kicking up clouds of red silt. As she reached him, the man rolled onto his side, his breath coming in ragged, wet rattles that sent a chill through her despite the desert heat. Even through a mask of trail grime and blood, his face was haunting, carved from shadows and hard choices, with eyes the color of a winter sky that seemed to look right through the world. "Easy now," Abby whispered, her voice a low anchor against the rising wind. "You've reached the Mesa. You're with a healer now." The man's hand, calloused and scarred from years of holding reins and triggers, shot out to grip her forearm with a strength that shocked her. Don't call the sheriff. The gold, it wasn't mine, but the lead is." Abby looked down at him, seeing the dark, spreading bloom of a gunshot wound just beneath his ribs. This was Silas Six-Gun Vane. She didn't need a newspaper to recognize the name. The telegraph wires had been humming with it for weeks. The Wraith of the Border, a man accused of a payroll robbery that left 3 deputies dead. But as she looked into those fractured, searching eyes, she didn't see a killer. She saw a man who had been hunted until he had forgotten the taste of water that wasn't tinged with his own blood. For the next week, the world narrowed to the flickering radius of a kerosene lamp in the back room of the infirmary. Abby tended to Silas with a clinical focus that fought a losing battle against a rising tide of empathy. She washed the salt of the trail from his skin, discovering a map of scars that told a story of a boy raised in the brush and a man broken by a peace that never came. When the fever gripped him, he didn't mutter threats. He whispered the name of a ranch called Silver Creek and a mother who had died waiting for a letter that never arrived. Abby stayed through the deepest hours of the night, pressing cool cloths to his brow and humming low lullabies, her heart skipping a beat whenever his hand would blindly find hers in the dark, clutching it like a drowning man reaches for a pier. The town of Devil's Mesa was a fragile thing, a collection of timber shacks clinging to the rock like barnacles. Tensions simmered in the local saloon, where the miners whispered about the stranger at the healer's house. When Silas finally woke, the air in the small room felt heavy, charged with the electricity of things left unsaid. He watched her move, his gaze lingering on the way the afternoon sun caught the copper highlights in her hair as she ground herbs. "Why?" he asked, his voice a rasping shadow. There's a bounty on my head that could buy you a real clinic in San Francisco. Why save a man the hangman is already whistling for?" Abby paused, her pestle hovering over the mortar. She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I've seen honest men steal the land from under their neighbors' feet in this town, Silas, and I've seen outlaws die to save a stray dog. Out here, the law is just a word people use when they want to own something. I don't care what they say you did. I care that you didn't fight me when I probed for that bullet." Silas let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. "I'm a dead man, Abby. If the sheriff doesn't find me, the men I was running from will. I saw who actually took that gold, and they wear badges, not masks." "Then we'll just have to make sure you stay alive long enough to tell the truth," she said firmly. The days that followed were a delicate, stolen peace. As Silas regained his strength, he began to help Abby, his large, steady hands surprisingly adept at fixing the sagging porch steps or sharpening her surgical tools. The local children, usually wary of strangers, began to visit, drawn to the quiet man who could carve intricate wooden horses out of scrap cedar. Abby watched him from the window, her chest tightening with a dangerous longing. She saw the man he was before the world broke him, a man of quiet dignity and hidden gentleness. One evening, under a canopy of stars so bright they looked like spilled diamonds over the mesa, they sat on the back steps. The only sound was the wind whistling through the canyons. Silas reached out, his thumb grazing her knuckles. The touch was soft, but it felt like a lightning strike. "I have to leave soon," he murmured, his face a mask of regret. "The longer I stay, the more I turn this house into a graveyard." Abby turned to him, her eyes shining with fierce defiance. "And if you leave, you're just walking back into the noose. Stay. We can go to the territorial judge. I have records. I have friends." "Abby." He moved closer, the scent of cedar and old leather surrounding her. He cupped her jaw, his touch trembling slightly. "I've spent 10 years looking for a reason to stop running. I found it here, in this dusty room with a woman who isn't afraid of the dark. But I love you too much to let you die for my ghosts." He kissed her then, a slow, desperate collision of two souls who found home in the middle of a wasteland. But the frontier is a jealous master. The next morning, the peace was shattered by the thunder of hooves. It wasn't the law, but a gang of regulators, hired killers led by the very men Silas had witnessed stealing the payroll. They rode into the mesa with torches and repeating rifles. Abby's heart turned to lead as she saw them surround the infirmary. "Vane," the leader bellowed, "give us the ledger you took, or we burn the lady with the house." Silas was already in the kitchen, checking his revolvers. He looked at Abby, a world of pain and resolve in her eyes. "The ledger is in my saddlebag, hidden in the false bottom. Abby, if I don't make it, take it to the governor in Prescott." "Don't you dare leave me," she hissed, grabbing her rifle. "You taught me how to lead a target yesterday. Now get to the side window. I'll cover the front." The battle was a blur of cordonite smoke and screaming lead. Abby stood her ground on the porch, the kick of the rifle bruising her shoulder as she suppressed the men in the street. Silas moved like a ghost, flanking the gang from the shadows of the stables. The air was thick with sulfur and the splintering of wood. It was brutal, quick, and desperate. When the final shot echoed away, the leader of the regulators lay face down in the red dirt, and Silas stood over him, his shirt soaked in fresh blood, but his eyes clear. The townspeople emerged from their homes, shocked into silence. Silas didn't look at them, he looked only at Abby. He walked to her, his gait heavy, and handed her a small leather-bound book. "This is the truth, Abby, the names of every man who sold out the territory. Take it, live." "We'll take it together," she whispered, catching him as his knees finally buckled. As the sun began to set, painting the mesa in hues of gold and violet, the town felt different. Julian survived the night, and while his name wasn't cleared in a day, the ledger ensured he was no longer a hunted man. "You're a stubborn woman, Abby Sterling," Silas said weeks later as they watched a stagecoach pull out of the station, not as fugitives, but as passengers heading towards a new life. "And you're a lucky man, Silas Vane," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. The road ahead was long, and the shadows of the Mesa still lingered in their hearts, but as the horses pulled them towards the horizon, they didn't look back. The frontier had tried to break them, but instead it had given them the only thing worth fighting for, a love that could survive the dust.